17 Friday seminar for PSU. This is a joint effort between urban planning and civil engineering. And today we have the great pleasure to have an invited guest speaker, Ricardo Giesen from Catholic University of Chile in Santiago. And very topic is about the bus ranching, and if you took public transportation today or yesterday, maybe you realize that it's a very timely topic, because when you have, unforeseeable events like snow and weather events, it's very hard to avoid bus ranching. So it's a very important topic, and very happy to have Ricardo here. Has a long experience working with actual transit companies in Santiago. So there will be questions at the end. The presentation is going to be roughly 35, 40 minutes. And so, thank you, Ricardo.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me, Miguel. We have known for a few years back in Texas and then in Maryland. He was ahead of me in the PhD. And after graduating, I went back to the Catholic University, where I'm now a professor and also the director of my department. And a colleague of mine has just applied for a proposal to study bus punching, and the idea was to gather real-time information and see how we can avoid that. Since I had studied a little bit of the problem of bus punching during the PhD, I joined the team, and what I'm going to present today is from the early beginnings. This work had been co-authored with Juan Carlos Muñoz, who was the leading in the original and the first project that we had together. We had in the 11 years, I think we are in the 4th projects working on this. And at the time, Felipe Delgado joined us as a PhD student. He did his PhD on this. And after we tried the ideas that we did in his thesis, we now have a little startup working on this. So that's roughly the idea that I'm going to present. So this little startup is transit.uc.com, and we have an app which is Bus Assist to try to avoid bus punching. And this research has been also co-funded by the Bus Rapid Transit Center of Excellence, which is funded by the Volvo Research Educational Foundation, in which we partnered with MIT, the WRI, and at the beginning there was also the University of Sydney and the Lisbon Institute of Technology. Okay? And I'm also researching in the Center for Urban Sustainable Systems. I'm going to start showing a little bit about Santiago so that you get an idea what's the city. That's the city in winter. We are now in the middle of the summer, and so it's funny for me to be here in this type of weather. So a few pictures of Santiago. And this is our campus. It has 3 buildings by Alejandro Aravena, who won the Pritzker Prize, which is the most prestigious prize in architecture last year. So a few pictures, and that's the mountains. We have Los Andes and ski resorts, an hour drive in July, August, which is our winter time, if you want to go. So what I'm going to present today, it's divided in roughly 5 parts. First, I'm going to talk about the problem of bunching of buses. For those of you who have never taken bus, probably you don't know the problem, but if you have taken buses in your life, you had experienced this. Then I'm going to talk about the research we did and what were the ideas, how we get to publish things, and why we decided to, based on these simulation results, to try to implement this in a company, and all the challenges that we have been facing to keep this going. Okay? So, some humor here. So, we know that buses are more efficient in using the space. When we started working on that, we did a workshop on BRT that was in 2008. and we took a picture right next to the presidential palace. Of course, this picture, probably you have seen it before, but we took it in Santiago, right next to the presidential palace, thinking that if we did that, we are going to get in the first page of the newspaper. It wasn't like that. We managed to get the street, we managed to do the picture, but the picture was only in one newspaper, really in the middle of nowhere, so we didn't get all the attention we wanted. But still, it's important to improve the level of service of public transport so that we can have a better use of our space. So normally, what we know is that users perceive waiting time and working time twice as important as travel time inside the vehicle. They don't want to transfer, especially if the transfer is are non-comfortable. They need a reliable experience, and that's one of the problems with bunching. Request a minimum comfort experience, and that's a severe problem in cities like mine, in which buses are really overcrowded, and if you have bunching, you normally board the crowded bus and not the other ones. You need information, and you need to feel safe and secure. What can we say about bus services? Of course, that buses are critical to provide a good door-to-door alternative. But as we normally operate it, they normally suffer from low speed because they are in traffic, and normally vehicles turning right will block the bus, and you have all this. They are subject to congestion, they're unreliable, they hard to convey network to the public, and they have normally, in my country at least, a negative public image. So we wanted to bring to the buses what is good in a metro system, for instance. So what are the attributes in a metro system? Normally it's fast, you don't wait, or the waiting times are known, you have a comfort and it's reliable. So there are measures to increase the speed, there are measures to increase frequency and to increase capacity, but one of the critical, and the one that are looking to solve here, is to improve the regularity so that the buses arrive as often as they should be. And to do that, we need to improve Headway regularity, and that's the focus of this talk. I'm going to show a small example, an academic example of why bus bunching happens. So if we have two bus stops, and to have two buses, we would like that the buses are always on the opposite side of the diameter. So they are normally at the same distance, and they pass every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. Depending on how many buses, we would like them to go at the same interval. But there are a lot of stochasticity in our system. Which ones? The demand at the bus stops and the travel time between bus stops. So with these two things, it's very difficult for the buses to maintain the desired headway. So what happened? For instance, we have a lot of people coming out of a seminar, and you all go and take the bus or take the tram. So what happened with that tram? It will have a longer stop at the bus stop, and the vehicle that's coming behind will have a shorter headway. So if you have a short headway with the previous vehicle, there are not that many passengers that are going to accumulate in the stop. So all your stops, the following stops, are going to be short. And if you are delayed from what was the desired headway, you're going to start catching up a lot of passengers on the following stops. And if you catch more passengers, you become crowded. They're going to ask you for stops longer, and the other vehicles are going to continue coming faster, and this is going to go slower. And at the end, we see what we normally tend to see, that the vehicles come together. And this is very bad, because if we have vehicles coming every 10 minutes, now we have two vehicles coming every 20 minutes. And what happened? What's the perception of a user of the system? Is that you wait too long for a crowded vehicle. You don't see, or you wouldn't think that this is a problem of control of how you avoid bunching. Bunching is not in the mindset of users. They normally see long waiting times and crowded vehicles. And that's what you see on the streets. I'm not sure if all these buses were the same number, but it's very common that you will see these, we call it trains of buses. And this is the crowded one, and this is the one that you're going to board because you have been waiting already twice the time you wanted to wait. So you board that. These are comics in Santiago. The people complain about the quality and the service of the buses, and they're really crowded. Since we were working with people at MIT, I took this picture outside the main campus at MIT. And, well, this was during winter. These buses are supposed to come every 12 minutes, and you have 3 of them together here. But, well, they told me, well, this comparison is not fair because during winter it's harder to operate. And so then we took the same picture in summer, so that... but that's my thing. No. Probably here it's different. This is Bogota, the same thing. I took that one in Beijing, China. This is Brussels. These are the 2 same lines together. And actually the frequency there is slower. And if you go to Wikipedia and you look for bus bunching, they will show you a picture in London. So, and there is clear that they have the same service. If we go and look at the trajectories, and this was a line that runs right outside my campus at the university and crosses the city, and I'm going to come back to this line 210 because we did pilots and with this line. And here we see time, and these are trajectories, and these are distance from, I think this is the beginning. So what we saw here is that you see the trajectories of the buses going together. The other thing we should have noticed at the beginning, and I'm going to go back again on this, that is that the dispatching at the terminal is not regular. So you have that problem, but we were so fixed studying bus bunching that we didn't notice that much that the dispatching was not regular. For us, I don't know, because we were not working in a bus company, for us it was, if I had to send buses every 5 minutes, that should be easy. The problem is that the dynamic of the system makes that the buses come together. So if we solve, probably for us this was not a problem. We need to have the trajectories going every 5 minutes. But if you look at closely, we see that sometimes they send 2 buses together, 3 buses together, and then they don't send any bus because they don't have a bus, because they have, if you have a lot of time without buses, at the terminal you don't have any bus to send. So when you don't have regularity, you cannot dispatch regularly from the terminal. And here, with this, in this service in which you should have a bus every 3 to 4 minutes, you might wait more than 40 minutes. So this is a severe problem. Most passengers wait longer than they should for crowded buses. Put pressure on the authority for more buses, and that's another problem because when people complain that there are not enough buses, they will not complain that we lack something to have a more regular service. Normally, at least in our country, there's private operators. So the private operator doesn't have really an incentive to solve the problem because if people complain that they want more buses, probably in their contract they're going to ask for more buses per hour, and so they're not looking to solve the problem. It will reduce the reliability affecting passengers and operators. In terms of the operator, the cycle time of the bus is unreliable. You don't know if the bus is going to arrive because there are some buses that run very fast and others that go very slow. So sometimes you're not going to have the buses to send to a new service or to the same service on the opposite direction, and you might need more buses to operate. And for passengers, it's a very unreliable system. So the idea is to provide control strategies to avoid the bus bunching. Of course, the idea is not new and had been tried, but not that many companies operate successfully strategies to avoid bus bunching. So what are the two main ideas to solve bus bunching? One is to have schedules. And you tell people at what time are you going to stop at each bus stop. And that's what normally is when you talk, and I ask people, I tell them that I'm working in this problem, they always come back with someone who had visited a small city in Europe, and they told me, oh, and the buses ran on time, and they arrive at the hour that they're supposed to be at the bus stop. But they don't realize that, well, if you're going to pass a bus every 40 minutes or every 30 minutes, well, it makes a lot of sense to tell someone at what time this bus is going to stop at each place, and probably you build some slack so that the bus could arrive on time to the different stops. But if you're going to run buses every 3 to 4 minutes, it doesn't make much sense to first provide the time of the day that the bus is going to stop, because the error in my watch and yours is going to affect, and you are not going to look into that. So you're just going to go to the bus stop to board the first bus that arrives. And if you want to build the slacks in a big city so that the bus arrive on time, you will have the bus going very slowly so that they could keep on track. So this idea, which might be very good if you have night services, in big cities doesn't make much sense if you're going to have high-frequency services. So what we're proposing to do is to control the headway, to have regular headways. I don't care at what time the bus supposes to pass at a particular stop. If all buses are delayed 10 minutes, we don't have a problem because they are passing at the regular headways. And that's the main idea here. So there are some strategies suggested in the literature. I'm going to mention some of them. But what are the challenges in practice is to make the smart solution robust enough to put it in practice. The other big challenge, and this is one that we are facing right now, is driver compliance. Maybe if we look at 20 years from now in which we have autonomous vehicles, that will not be a problem. But for now, and for the next 20 years, driver compliance is a big issue. And what are the measures that you would like to look to see if the measures is effective? Maybe headway deviation in control points. You would look at some points along the route and so see how regular were the headways, waiting times, bus loads, and in the case of Santiago, and that was one of the reasons that gave us the chance to prove our ideas on the street, there are fines to the operators for lack of regularity. So there's an index of regularity compliance, and if you measure this index of regularity compliance, at the end of the month, each operator pays a fine based on how irregular their services are. So there was a pioneer paper by Turnquist and Bloom that they were looking at threshold policies. So if you want to run buses every 5 minutes, whenever a bus is below 3 minutes from the previous one, you hold it until 4, for instance. And you can fine-tune how much you will do. You will use that threshold, but that was the main idea. And when we started the research, we thought that was a clever idea, and that probably should be our benchmark against which we wanted to compare. And there were other papers here in the literature. I'm not going to go into the details, but in most of the cases, they ignored the vehicle capacity, which was a very important issue for our problem in Latin America. We normally have crowded buses. The system is designed so that they have high occupancy, and sometimes you cannot board the first bus. And so we wanted to have that in our model that was considered only in 2. And we came with a new idea, because it was easier to model this way, is to have a boarding limit. Maybe if a bus is ahead of schedule or is delayed already and it's getting crowded, you prevent that everyone that is waiting for that bus board that one and ask people to wait for the next one. It's not a very popular idea, and I'm going to show in which cases this makes sense. So the idea is to have two decision variables, is how much to hold the bus and how many people let board. So, for instance, and this is common in Chile, actually. In a crowded bus stop, there normally is going to be a line to board the bus. So in that sense, it could be implemented in a fair way to say, well, board these few passengers and the next, wait for the next one. And we have some passengers prevented for boarding. And the idea is to use that before the bus gets really crowded and full, because when you have a full bus and follow it by another full bus, then the headway between the two available buses for people in a bus stop, it's very long. For those of you who have studied mathematical programming models, the great part of this research was that we didn't use binary variables to model the problem, and that allowed us to solve this problem in less than 1 second, which make it feasible to implement for real-time instances. Otherwise, you can try it, and there are some of the research in the literature that solve very complex problems. You can do it in the lab, but then in practice you are not going to have enough time to solve these real-time instances. So what were the system characteristics that we consider for the simulation, and this is part of the research? We have a corridor with n bus stops and k buses operated in a loop. So for research purposes, we consider that the buses running in a loop, in a continuous loop, with homogeneous buses, and we change maybe demand parameters. We have data about bus position, bus load, and number of passengers waiting at each stops that on a research you can do. In practice, you normally need to work with forecasts and estimations. And in practice, that hasn't shown to be a big problem. Some information about trip destination is good, because then you can predict better how crowded is going to be the bus. In terms of dwell times at bus stops, we consider that the boardings were the dominating factor of how much time a bus was stopping at each bus stop. And we assume that buses serve all stop and overtaking is not allowed. And in practice, we also studied at some point when it would make sense for buses on the same line to overtake. And we found that if we control headway regularity, it doesn't make much sense that buses on the same line will overtake. Because once two buses get together, it's very hard to separate them, and overtaking will not solve the problem. So what we're doing is that every time a bus arrives to a bus stop, we solve an optimization problem. So this bus arrived to a bus stop, we see where are the buses, and we solve an optimization problem to try to minimize the waiting times of all passengers in the system. With two decision variables, how much time I'm going to hold all the buses for the remaining bus stops until the end, and how many passengers I'm going to prevent to board until the end. So there were decision variables, and I solve it every time, and in simulation you can do, every time a bus arrives to a bus stop, you solve it. And you continue. So we solve a big problem to take only few decisions, and then we roll it again and solve again. In terms of the mathematical problem, and I'm not going to show you all the formulation, but just so that you take an idea of what are the objectives here, we have, these are the decision variables, holding times and how many people are prevented to board at each bus stop and each bus. And we want to minimize the total waiting time for the first bus at the bus stop, the waiting time for people that are inside the bus and have to be, and is holded at any particular point. So That's part of the thing that we would like to. And if we want to have different weight for these waiting times, we could add them here. The literature suggests that waiting at the bus stop is normally penalized twice as waiting inside the vehicle. So you could have a value double than this. Then we have a waiting time. If you not board the first bus, then all the waiting time until the next bus or whatever bus you board could be penalized at a different rate. And we have a penalty here if we don't allow to board a bus if there is enough space. So with that, and putting all the constraints so that the system worked, and we ran simulations. In the simulations, we have a one-way loop transit corridor with 30 stop and 29 traffic lights in both ways. High passenger demand. We were considering headway of 2 minutes. This is a very high frequency services, 30 buses per hour. We also consider competing flow because in these simulations and the results, and I'm not going to go into the details, but we also consider transit signal priority. So if a bus is going to pass a traffic light and the bus is delayed, probably we would like to extend the green light so that this bus goes faster. If a bus is going ahead of schedule, sometimes we don't want to provide extra green time so that we can delay the bus without anyone complaining inside the bus, which is another problem normally when you implement these things. So cycle times, here are some of the parameters of the simulation. And I'm going to focus only on two strategies. One is no control. No control, which is normally better than most of system, because in here, in simulation, we were considering that the dispatch at the terminal was regular. And as I mentioned, you cannot dispatch regularly at the terminal if you're not doing anything with headway regularity along the way. So in no control, we dispatch regularly from the terminal every 2 minutes, and we let the system go without any intervention. And in the proposed model, we included holding, boarding limits, and green extensions. So the three strategies, but the most interesting one at the end turned out to be holding. So I'm getting ahead of our result. Well, we did simulations, and we ran many times per 2 hours. And to do the comparisons, we did a warm-up in which we didn't control for 15 minutes, and then we started doing control in the experiments. And so how this was work, the optimization model was written in an AMPL. We send it to a solver. We have a simulator from which we read the state variables every time a bus arrives to a bus stop. We solve the problem, and we took the control action, and that was simulated. And then I'm going to show you here. This is the corridor. These boxes are the 30 bus stops. Here is the same with the proposed control strategy. The dots are buses that when I ran the simulation, and this is a vivid, we normally didn't run it like that, but this is to show how it works. Here, the bus, if it has less than 25% of the occupancy, it's green. If it's between 25 to 50, it's going to be yellow. Orange is more than half of the occupancy. And red if it's between 75 and 100% of the occupancy. So it's a crowded bus. And we are going to see the buses running from left to right. For the first 15 minutes, we are going to see the same because we are not going to do any control action in the bottom part. And then we're going to start doing control, and these are perfectly compliant drivers, so we're going to solve the problem. So, oh wait, now it doesn't allow me, no? don't know if because I changed the resolution, it doesn't work. Okay, I'm not going to get. Well, let me show you some results. So, waiting time for the first bus can be reduced by 81% if we consider the variable part of waiting time. So there's a fixed part of waiting time. If you have 30 buses per hour and you have perfectly regular services, the buses will stop every 2 minutes. So on average, anyone arriving to the bus stop should wait at least 1 minute. On top of that, everything else is what we can reduce, and we were able to reduce from the no control strategy 81%. There's reduction on extra waiting time of 83%. Of course, there's an increment on waiting in vehicle, and there's a reduction on waiting that's from green extensions. So in total, we reduced the variable waiting time by roughly 61%. That's numbers. If we see the load profiles of buses, and here I'm showing all the buses that run from the first stop to the last one, and how crowded they were, and the capacity of these buses is considered to be 100. Without control, we see that it's very regular, the occupancy of the buses, and there are going to be buses that normally are ahead of the pack that are going to travel most of the route, very crowded, and some others are not going to have that many passengers. And notice that if you are a passenger, it's 3 times more likely that you are in this bus than in this bus, because this bus only carry 30 people and this one 100. Okay. When you do control, the occupancy of the buses is more regular. The other thing, and this was something that we were not expecting, is a little bit not intuitive. If you take the cycle time of the bus, how long does it take for the bus from the beginning to the end? The cycle time can be reduced. So here you have buses that took less than 30 minutes, more than 45 of some others, and on average they were 37 minutes. When we did control, buses on average took 35 minutes. We reduced it a little bit, but the variance was reduced a lot. And the explanation for this is that when you do control, you normally delay buses that in other cases are going to go very fast, and that prevents buses that are normally ahead of the pack on the bunching that go very slow, which are these ones here. These normally are buses that took very long to do the cycle and were very crowded. And here's a comparison of the strategies, and here I'm going to look at what are the percentage of passengers that have to wait more than 10 minutes, and here we were considering buses running every 2 minutes. So if buses should run, so if we have 30 buses per hour, what are the percentage of passengers that wait more than 10 minutes in our simulation? With no control, it's roughly 3.5, 3.6%. With threshold control, with the simple strategy and the one that we thought at the beginning that could be, if this difference was not very important, probably what you should propose is the threshold control strategy. This is roughly 1% of the passengers will wait more than 10 minutes in a scenario in which their waiting time should be not more than 2. And with more sophisticated control strategies that, like the one we were proposing, we diminished this by an order of 10. So you might think that 1% is not that relevant, but 1% in Santiago, in my city, there are every day 4 million trips in buses, 4 million legs of trips. So 1% on 4 million, you have a full stadium of people complaining that they had waited more than they should. And if you add that for a complete week, you have a lot of people unsatisfied with their transit system. So we thought that we had merit, at least from our results, to try and do it in practice. So this is a summary of what we had concluded so far. And since I'm running a little late, what I'm going to jump is to this conclusion. We should do it. And we started and we did a pilot project. And we did the pilot project with the same line that I mentioned before, which is the line 210, what runs right in front of the university. And in Santiago, for irregularity, bus companies pay every month roughly $2.3 million. And there are 7 companies operating in the system. So we thought probably we were not going to go down to 0, but if we can decrease in a significant way, so each company a month is paying roughly $300,000. So a year, this is $3 million. If we can reduce 1/3, that's a good value proposition for them. And of course, we are in academia, so we don't know that much about selling things to companies, and it had taken way longer than they thought. But anyway, it's been very fun. We approached them. We had to do some arrangement to our model. I'm going to skip that. So instead of solving every time a bus arrived to a bus stop, we are solving every 1 minute, but some implementation issues. And we did a pilot test with the service 210 in November 2012 and then on April 2013. Since we didn't have any communication capabilities, we operated with the GPS of the buses. We were reading where they were. We had data about the demand on this corridor. And we were solving our problem and sending instructions to students on the way who were with, this is the line. So this is a line very complicated. If you have to think and you have to do it again, probably I had chosen a simpler line, because to do a pilot with one of the most complex services in the city maybe was not the best idea, but that's the way we did it. Here I'm showing a real case of benching where we have few buses here, a few others here, and other at the end. And I'm going to show here the picture. We have students here with cell phones. These are 6 or 7-year-old cell phones that were bigger than now. And we send them instructions on text messages with the solution of how much to hold the buses. And so they were taking notice here, and they gave instruction to the driver. Some data about the corridors. There have roughly 50,000 passengers per day. Buses run every 3 to 4 minutes during rush hour. It's a very long route, 56 kilometers and 135 stops. And in rush hour, they have 60 buses operating the service. And what did the pilot studies show us? These were the fines. These are in Chilean pesos. $1 is roughly 670 Chilean pesos. But these are control days without control, and here are the 2 days in which we did the pilot. And when we did the pilot, we reduced significantly the amount of fines that they were paying in those lines. And we were not doing every bus stop. It was only 8 places in which we have students. It was an effort. These are the trajectories without control, and you can see that there are some problems with some of the data, and that we have been improving a lot during the previous year, and that the pilot plan, and you see some trajectories that shouldn't be there, and you still have some problems with bunching, but less than without the strategy. Other results that were surprising and very nice is that user validations increased. The demand increased by 20% during the pilot plan days. And what the explanation for that is that when the bus is very crowded, for many passengers it's very difficult to tap in with the fare card. So if we run it smoothly or on regular headways, everybody who arrives there could tap in, and so the passive evasion which is a common problem in our system, was decreased severely. But we didn't see significant effect on bus frequencies and cycle times. With that, we created this group Transmilenio. And what happens normally when you go and offer new things, it's that people tend to tell you that they're very busy. So it's part of the idea. But we developed all the technology so that to be able to communicate with drivers effectively. I'm not going to go to the details of that. And so we did a new pilot. And since the company was happy with the first result, we went back to them. And one of the problems we had in this second is that they already had a console. And the console was working with a schedule. So the driver for many years already had worked with a schedule that didn't work. And what we did was an API to communicate with that console and change the instructions on the console. But the drivers didn't believe that the console was going to give. They already knew that the console was giving bad information. So that was one of the issues. This is the data, and this was the console that they had on first place. The other thing that the console had many data that's not very useful for the driver. So a lot of information not required. And the only thing that was relevant is how is he going compared to the desired. And what we did was to change the desired arrival time to bus stop. So this bus is ahead of 1 minute of the desired arrival time. And then we were given instruction of when he should leave the bus stop. And normally they cannot implement it like that. So if you tell a driver he should leave in 20 seconds, what he does normally is to drive slowly to the next bus stop. Otherwise, people will complain inside the bus. Like here, it's another. And they were providing some, I don't know, please help to the regularity. Follow the instructions. So the more I've been working on that, the less it makes sense to try to gain compliance with drivers if you treat them like that. So the other thing we had is that we had problems with the GPS data. Some buses didn't report in 3 minutes, so it was hard to predict where the bus was currently located. And we had to work with the app of other company who didn't see any benefit for them of doing better instructions. The other thing what we see in practice is that some drivers like to bunch, because if you bunch, you don't carry that many passengers and you finish your shift earlier. So you have benefits of bunching. Some other drivers vandalized the console, so we had to put plastic layer on top of it and not anymore a touch screen. And the users were frustrated by the current level of service and that do not like to be held on stops. So normally anyone who's inside the bus don't like to be held because that benefits the ones that are going to board and the next stop, not them. Once you are in the bus, you want the bus going fast. And for us, it was very difficult to work with this company because they still wanted the idea of a schedule. For some reason, we couldn't make them aware of the problem to have this schedule in place. So they wanted to go back to schedule when the bus arrived to the next stop, and they were doing. The planning was not integrated with the execution, so they planned in one way, they executed a different way, but there was no the feedback loop. And there were no incentives for drivers to comply. So if they don't gain any benefits, it's probably not fair. Then we did a pilot test in Transmilenio in Bogota. Colombia. This is the route in which we work. And again, we had to work with a completely different system. They have already a system in place, and we were at the bus control terminal, and this is our CEO. He was copying text messages. We were solving the problem, but since we couldn't go directly, we were sending them instructions. So it was a text message with the driver. That was the console, and please go again. If you go to the math of this to analyze, the waiting time can be expressed as two parts. This is the frequency. This is half of the headway between two buses, plus this term that is related with the variance of the headways. In this part, you cannot do anything more than add more buses or increase the speed of the buses, but that's the part that we are working on. And I showed this because this is the fixed part and this is the variable part, and when you want to compare data on real basis, this is normally not the same because some days they operate with less buses, some days the traffic is worse, so the cycle times of the buses is different. So I'm going to show I'm going to divide the total waiting time of passengers in this, the fixed part and the variable part. That's what I'm going to show in the next slides, okay? So these are the results of the pilots. This is with control. I'm comparing with this other day without control. So as you can see, the regularity at the waiting time at the beginning, and this is along the route. This is 3% after they leave the dispatching center, 13%, 23%, and this is at the end, 93% of the route, along the route. And what you would expect if you don't do control is that the waiting time is going to be increasing. And it's going to be increasing because the variable part is going to be increasing, but the fixed part should remain the same because that depends on how many buses per hour run and what's the cycle time. And when we compare, we notice that the cycle times and the number of buses that were operating in the day that we did the pilot was different, but we were able to do something that is very unusual. Since they were dispatching so irregularly, we can decrease a little bit along the route the waiting time. That shouldn't happen if you dispatch more regularly. On a second day, and these are more comparable days, we decrease, but on average, we sort of maintain the regularity or the waiting times along the route. Without control, you see how the waiting time increased. And this was the third day in which we did the trial, and we managed to keep waiting times along the route, whereas without control, they normally tend to increase. In terms of cycle time, there also we were able to decrease a little bit cycle times, and you see more variability without control. So we had promising results, more regularity, less fines, and more demand. We still have the problems that not all drivers follow the instruction, and not all the vehicles have the consoles working. And sometimes companies don't realize that some consoles are not working until you go and do a trial and start sending information. They believe that they work because the instruction that or the information that is given is not that is not so useful. So this is our state of the art, the last part. We now have our own consoles installed in one service in Santiago. And we changed a little bit actually this is not going anymore. We tell them what's the next stop. We tell him if he's ahead, behind, what's the bus that is behind and what's the bus in front. So he has a sense of where is the bus in front, where is the bus behind, what's the distance, what is the expected time between the two buses, so that when you give instruction, it makes sense to them. Otherwise, it's very difficult to believe that you're giving something that is useful, and we build a platform to support the console, and we are using industrial consoles to operate. We are working with this company in Santiago, which is Redbus. And thankfully, this company is a French company that operates services around the world. So with them, we might do a trial in New York during this year. So if everything goes right, we're going to do something here in the US. They have 61 lines, approximately 600 buses. They have approximately 300,000 daily paid trips with our fare card. And they have a severe problem of fare evasion. That's one of the main problems in Transantiago right now. We have 25% of fare evasion, so we are also trying to work on that problem. This is some data from dispatching and regularity along the route for different operators in Santiago. In Santiago, there are 7 operators, and last year we got all the data, and I took a number of fines. But the most important part is we can see that there's no regularity at the beginning of the service, but as the services go longer, and some companies operate longer services than others, the regularity starts to increase. Then normally all companies, without control strategies, have a similar performance along the route. They deteriorate the regularity almost in the same slope. But some of them have better dispatching rules than others. So what we have now, we have this console operating in 2 services in Santiago. We have a synoptic. We have a dispatcher that is operating in most of the services in Redbus, this company in Santiago, because we realized that before doing the work with drivers, we needed to dispatch more regular. And dispatching, if you don't have information of where the next bus is coming on the other way, and if you're going to have buses to dispatch, it's a real issue. So we developed an app to do the dispatching, to give better instruction, and actually also to provide all the information to keep record of when are the buses being dispatched. Since we have all the data, we also developed an app for users. There are many apps for users in which we have real-time information of where are the buses. It's like an elevator. It's better to know where the elevator is than someone telling you how many minutes you need to wait. So in the same sense, if you're showing them where is the bus, that makes sense. We can provide them with our forecast of how crowded that bus is, but we decided not to do it because it's less reliable information, and unless you're really comfortable giving that information, we would like to wait. We also do a lot of demand analysis for the companies. We show them how many passengers are at each bus stop. And with this type of analysis, we also do some forecasting about fare evasion per bus stop. We developed an app to recollect data because since it's a tap-in system and not tap-out, sometimes you need to collect data on how many passengers are in each bus. And so we built this. And now we are been doing MOOCs, or massive online open courses, but for drivers, to explain them what's the importance of this, what are the tools. And for now, we have been training dispatchers, and now we are building courses for drivers, so that make them aware of the problem of lack of regularity in the service they provide, and trying to work together so that we can decrease or solve the problem. Okay. So here are some of the apps. This is the. And I think this. Let me see if this works. So yeah, here it's working in a bus in Santiago. So it keep the speed. Which is the next stop? Which is the bus ahead? Which is the bus behind? And this is how is it going for Redbus. We started on March this year. The system started here, and we see the decreases in fines per day. This is And this is in dollars. This is fines per month on the months that we had been operating, and the months, this is the fines per expedition. So roughly we went from 180,000 to 140,000. And we still are working, and you see how they increase a little bit here, which are our month. This month we had a lot of rain, and whenever rain in Santiago, we don't have that much rain, so every time it rains it's very complicated for the transit system. This is the app, and these are the demand profiles for services, and these things allow the company to think of maybe if you have too much demand in this part of the corridor, maybe you can operate at short services, so you can do some tactical operations here to provide better service as well. So what are the challenges and opportunities, and which this I want to finish? I think more companies are interested in this type of solutions, so we look forward to work with them. How to improve the perception of drivers, that's a big issue. How to communicate with the driver. Is an image the best, or maybe voice, or combination? How's the best way to interact with someone who's driving, who's doing many other things at the same time? How to present the information in the monitor, which is, and maybe thinking about gamification to improve the compliance. And in these things, we are thinking on how to give incentives to drivers, because you want each one to do it well, but you want the team also to do it well. So if you have something as a goal, as all the drivers that operate a line, how they going to share the benefits of decreasing fines or improving level of service. That's part of that. And I'm open to questions, and I think I keep too much time talking.
Yeah, I think in one of your previous slides, I think it was from the simulation, you reduced waiting times, but it looked like the time of the bus increased by like 7 times. Was that because people were actually on bus riding versus not waiting at a stop?
Yeah, I'm considering extra waiting time. So if the bus ran at the speed that they could, compared to holding it a little bit, you're going to increase the travel time for those who are on the bus. So
basically a benefit.
You need to do that to get all the other benefits.
Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned in your model simulation that you included a warm-up period, it was 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious as to what the idea behind that is and the impact on the results, if any.
Well, probably have a little bit border effects, but it's to see if you can recover from what you have, because when you start giving instructions, it's very hard to have some. You would like to have all the buses positioned at 3-minute distances, but in practice that could be difficult. So we say, well, let's start with a system that it's a little bit disorganized. Yeah. No, we didn't calibrate it. We just did the simulation like that, so that say, okay, we are going to do the comparison, and I'm not going to count the first 15 minutes, because in the case of no control, if you send all the buses regularly, at the beginning you don't have much of a problem as well. So okay, let's do the comparison if we start at now doing control in a transit line. How long it would take to recover, things like that.
Okay. So I have a question about it sounds like on average the system is getting better, but so for example, besides the average, once batching happens, like you have 3 buses together, how long does it take for the buses to go back to normal in terms of distance or time? Because I know it's getting better, but if something bad happens, is it possible? Because right now, is it possible really to separate them?
In practice, it's very, very difficult to separate buses once they bunch. So what you want is to give all the time instructions so that you don't need to hold the bus too much. If you're giving buses instruction along the way all the time, you might avoid the bunching and might avoid to hold the bus for, because when you solve the problem, of course you have a constraint that you cannot hold the bus more than 20 seconds at the bus stop. And in practice, you cannot hold the bus. You just, the driver sees that it's behind 20 seconds, and he can go slowly, and they know how to manage the speed between bus stops. So
it's like, is the driver in charge of saying, I'm going to let 5 people in, and
No. I didn't mention that much. We work with the idea of boarding limit. Was a good way of solving the problem, but in practice, in simulation, we found that if the frequency, if you have more than 30 buses per hour, it would make sense to do boarding limits whenever 2 buses are really close together and the second bus is less than 30 seconds behind. So, yeah. We don't want to, and it's hard to implement. So, because you will need someone there to stop people from entering the bus. I had seen that in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, they form lines and there's someone dispatching buses at particular bus stops. And there you can think about that. In the Sao Paulo metro, there's also in some stations, there's a pre-boarding area. It's there for other reasons, but you might think that on implementing something like this, and that was my argument for the reviewer and on the journals to finally publish, because for them it didn't make sense. But in practice, we had never implemented that.
So Santiago had a 2 to 3 minute headway. Have you tried using it on a larger headway?
Yeah, actually, the service that we are operating right now, the B21, it operates around 8 minutes and off 10 minutes. Yeah. And once you have the system in place, you can use it with headway control, or you can use it during night hours with schedule. You provide the same information to the driver. But the schedule is easier now. So
we're enough time, so we have time for a few questions. If you're a student, don't worry. You can give us the question later or send an email. So don't worry about it.
Have you worked in cities where there's high volume of wheelchair use, and how do you accommodate and account for wheelchair accessibility in this whole model?
We haven't worked, well, in Santiago there are, but in normally it's very fast, the process of boarding and aligning, even with wheelchairs. I remember when I lived in Austin, Texas, and there was a guy with a wheelchair in my route to the university, and when they had to board, it was, 10 minutes, because the driver went out, they took, and I think this type of system help a lot with those type of issues, because, and the other thing that this system will work well is when you have a bus that failed during the route and it's out of service, because since the system doesn't require to know where the bus should be, it just take what is the supply that you have and where is the demand and how is the best you can manage. The instructions are going after the fact, after you recognize that the bus has been delayed because you are reading where is the bus, then your instructions are going to change. Because you know that this bus was delayed, so probably you're going to hold right away the bus that is behind. So in the next send instruction, we are submitting instruction every minute, we update the instruction. The bus that is behind the one that was delayed with the wheelchair is going to be held so that the regularity keeps. But the space with the bus in front, it depends on the demand patterns. If you are close to a terminal, you're not going to hold the bus behind. If this delay occurs at the beginning, you probably are going to hold. But the intuition will make that you will try to have the bus in between the two buses, the one ahead and the one behind.
I'm going to ask a similar question about how you account for individual variance between boarding times for passengers. So your response basically answered my question.
Yeah, we don't account in the model for that variance, but since we are reading and we are updating on real time, whenever we update, we take into account how is the system operating right now. So anyone who was delayed, but you don't have, today we don't have knowledge about the future, but we might in the future know where are those customers happening at a particular time. If someone with a wheelchair always go to a particular bus stop at 10 a.m., I hope that in 10 years more we are going to provide and look ahead and maybe plan and dispatch the bus that is going to, but we are not yet there.
Actually, just today made me think about this. Is the system robust enough to handle something like where a line is closed or like some sort of major disruption? Like today we had a train derailment, and so a lot of people had to shift over to the buses.
Yeah, you have a change in demand pattern. The way we are working right now, we work with historical forecast of demand. So if we were able to update on real time the demand forecast for the line, the instruction will adjust. In the case that you mentioned, what would happen is that you are going to start seeing changes in your system, and the instructions are going to change because you are seeing the change, but you're not being to be enough smart to recognize this change in demand. In the case of Santiago, we don't have real-time information about demand. We see the demand after the fact. So I have the demand of yesterday, but not today, because that's collected at the end of the day.
What was I going to say? I forgot. Has the public noticed this at all? You said you had that one Redbus line running for like 6 months.
No, we haven't done surveys on users of the company, and with that company, what we have been doing is only dispatching. We have only 2 lines of that company that are operating with the service.
You're mentioning that in some areas, like in Japan, they would queue up, whereas in other cultures, maybe they just all try to get on the bus at one time. Would you control for drivers if it's raining, saying, "Oh, I was getting them out of the rain, so we overcrowded the bus," and things like that?
Well, at the moment, we're not doing. We are allowing everyone to board. So yeah, so that wouldn't be a problem.
Thank you. We need to come to the. We have way over. Thank you so much.